Yeah, so I mean, I gotta ask you, the huge news here. It's the hottest topic not only in the SEC but in all of college football. Texas and Oklahoma, not a done deal, but certainly looks to be the case. Moving to the SEC. How do you think this affects Texas A&M? I don't think there's literally a better person to ask this question.
Yeah, and I've been reading some of the stuff you've been writing about it, and we're like-minded in this, and it affects A&M. I'll put it this way: I think it affects A&M more than it does any of the other current 13 members, without question. And I think that's kind of why you saw such a visceral reaction from Aggies and their fan base. And I think I don't think there was some sinister plot to leave A&M out of it. I think on the A&M side, they need to do some digging in to find out why it wasn't much more well known throughout the chain of command at A&M. I think that's an A&M thing more than it is an SEC thing. Although, I think there should have been maybe a little more coordination to kind of get everyone situated and ready for it. But the Aggies' reaction, look, people have short memories. They forget 10 years ago what Texas and Baylor and Texas Tech were doing when A&M was leaving for the SEC, and their efforts to thwart that move, both politically, the social media reaction. It's almost like times have changed so much, even in a decade. And the biggest thing that's changed, Mike, is A&M. I mean, it is. This is not the same Texas A&M that came to the league 10 years ago. Now, it may have seemed A&M hit the ground running. That was because a few first-round draft picks and Johnny Manziel. It was like the perfect year to do it. But even with Johnny, a Heisman winner, a transcendent player in college football, the Aggies lost 6 conference games in 2 years. And that was almost like the perfect timing of them coming in. Then they settled into that 5-loss kind of spin cycle, 7-5, 8-4 every year. See, to me now, this is a program that's grown. They've come through that. They hired a national championship head coach. They've built an SEC roster, one that looks a hell of a lot more like, LSU, Georgia, Florida than it does the other teams. I think their roster looks, when you see them take the field, they look better than the Auburns and the Tennessees. And I said before A&M played Florida this year, I thought the Aggies had more talent. And a lot of people made a pretty big deal about that, and I thought they did. And I think it showed on the field, not just in that game when they kind of wore Florida down, but really throughout the entire season as the season progressed. I mean, so they're prepared for those battles. They're prepared to, sustain it in the conference for a long time. And that doesn't matter if Texas is in it or Oklahoma. And that's why I think Aggie fans have taken a few days to kind of realize, you've got the national championship head coach, you've got the facilities, the stadium, the location. By the way, you're still a member of the Southeastern Conference, not like Texas is, and you're not. And they've been in the league 10 years. They've got a coach now that's going into year 4 in the conference. He's been in the South forever, and even in the league. The situation, they've got the roster. The situation is set up for long-term sustained success. Texas A&M coming into the SEC did not damage LSU. I don't think there's much of a difference of Texas coming in. In fact, they're walking into what could end up, we'll see whether it's a year or two, could end up being a couple of the best teams in A&M history. That is not off the table as a possibility. It might not be the best time for Texas to be joining the conference, and it might be the best time for the Aggies to kind of renew that rivalry. So I think where it affects them, and you've talked about this, I believe. Was it you that was talking about the recruiting? And
and that actually was going to be my next question because
talk about that.
that's the biggest complaint I've seen from Aggies. Well, we won't be able to pitch. We're the only SEC school in the state of Texas, and I would agree with you. 10 years ago, that was probably that would have been a sticking point for the Aggies. But the way I see it, Texas A&M has well surpassed Texas on the football field, and they are no longer just going head to head against the Longhorns. They're going against Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State. You name the elite. That's who's coming into the state of Texas. Those are your competitors. And I just think being the only school in the state of Texas from the SEC is not going to win those kids over. What's going to win those elite Texas prospects is we'll get you to the NFL. We'll compete for conference and national championships. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly. And you've got a national title head coach selling it. You've got last year's finish. You've got the trajectory. You've got the recent recruiting classes to sell. And I think you go and sell, hey, whatever you thought the SEC was, it just got better. And guess what? Now, for a lot of these kids, this matters. I would start selling the Texas game. Say now you come, not only do you get to play in the SEC, which you already were, but we're also going to get to play in one of the biggest games in college football every single year. You're going to get to go play the Longhorns. You don't have to go there. We're going to play them and beat them. So will this give Texas Texas is in a nice position on the recruiting front right now today because they've got a new coach with no, at least in terms of the kids they're recruiting, there are no glaring negatives to Steve Sarkisian. He's got no L's in Austin. And they're now all of a sudden overnight selling the SEC, which is ironic because they spent the entire recruitment of these kids telling them how the SEC is not a big deal and overrated and all the other things, which as anyone that can do any research knows is insane. By the way, I'm just letting y'all know, the Texas Longhorns and their fan base absolutely 1,000% believe the SEC is overrated and it's Alabama and the 13 Dwarfs. They have convinced themselves over the span of a decade that is the case. And playing close against LSU to start a couple of years ago and beating Georgia in that Sugar Bowl only confirms it in their mind. So just be ready because they laugh and scoff at any mention of the SEC gauntlet or grind or whatever you want to call it. But no, I think Texas will get a quick boost in recruiting. They're going to win a couple head-to-heads with A&M. It might help OU get over the top with a couple. The Aggies have typically had a lot of success against OU in state, even going back to Sumlin. So they're gonna get some, and that's fine. But Texas A&M not only is going to continue to recruit the state very well, Jimbo Fisher recruits nationally. And like you said the other day, they're fighting the Georgias and the Alabamas they flipped guys from Alabama. They fight LSU for guys, and they flipped guys recently from Georgia too, maybe even 3 of them by the end of this year. They go pull kids out of Florida that Miami and Florida State and the Gators want. Like, this is not a local brand anymore. It's not a state brand. Jimbo Fisher, and like you said, 10 years ago, this would not have been good for A&M. Had they come over and then Texas said, hey, we're coming with you, would not have been good. It's a different A&M. They're a national title hopeful. I wouldn't say they're right there in that contender yet, but they're right there on the edge. And a top 10 program, top 8 program, whatever, wherever Jimbo has that in a year or two, we'll see. I mean, we know how tough it is. Any year you can slip and have to climb back, but I think they're building. All signs point to this one going in the right direction and going fast. You don't worry about a top 20 program with a coach that has really accomplished next to nothing as a head coach coming into your league. So people need to take off. This is not Mac Brown. This is not Vince Young. This is not 2005. It's not even 2010. This is Texas that the reality is in 4 decades they've been elite in one of them. And that's it. In 4 decades. They've been elite in 1 decade. Like, A&M is different in Texas. Here's the thing. Texas is different too, Mike, right?
Mm-hmm.
They ran roughshod over the Big 12. And I don't fault them from the standpoint if you can do it. It's every man for himself. It's looking out for number one. And no one did that better than Texas. and they it exerted every ounce of leverage they could, and it eventually cost the league Nebraska, cost the league Colorado, and then A&M, and then Missouri, and now it's essentially killed the conference. So, again, SEC, beware, but I don't think Chris Del Conte and the Longhorns are coming into the SEC and sitting across the table from LSU and Georgia and Florida and Alabama and dictating what's going to happen and how things are going to go. It'll take a long time, and I don't think anybody sitting in a position of power today would still be there by the time that type of influence started over this league, if ever, and I don't think it ever will. And they're walking in and making the same amount of money as Vandy tomorrow, when they join. So it's a different Texas, and it's a different A&M. And OU, by the way, I think Oklahoma's the biggest loser in this deal, and they don't realize it yet. I think the Sooners will stay good. They'll stay really dang good. But OU has been operating in a league where they have twice as much talent as their nearest competitor in every game. Maybe against Texas, the talent gap isn't like that, but they're still that much better as a team. But twice as much talent in every conference game but one every single season for the last 10 years. And I challenge anyone to honestly tell me that in the decade that A&M's been in the league, that Oklahoma would have appeared in maybe one, and certainly no more than one SEC championship game in that decade. And I feel like they've been in about 7 or 8 of them in the Big 12 during that stretch. So to me, OU walks in, it's like, man, they're formidable. They're really good. They're well coached. They're incredible on offense typically. I say that so many of those yards and points against Bama and LSU came after halftime, when LSU hung 50 in the first half. And I mean, these are the type things like OU comes in and not to take anything away from them, but I think they walk in and they're like one of 6. I mean, do you think I'm off on that to say the Sooners come in, they certainly strengthen the league, but are they anything different than one of 6 right now?
No, they're doing it. From what I understand, their bottom line will increase by about $22 million a year. So
absolutely,
that's why they're doing it.
And it's survival. Right? I mean, it's getting out. It's getting out ahead of the disasters coming. There's a Category 5 aimed directly at the Big 12 coming out of the Gulf, and you're getting the heck out of town. You're not going to be that person just sitting back and riding it out. So them in Texas, they had a nice house, up in the hill country, and they got in their cars and drove over there and said, we're gonna go ahead and do this. And I think it's the same thing with Mike Slive. Freudian slip there. It's the same thing with Greg Sankey and the SEC. I think Sankey is, and it frustrated a lot of A&M people because Slive did make the promise that Texas would never come in without A&M's approval. But times change. The landscape of college football looks nothing like it did a decade ago, and I do think he's looking ahead going, we're going to have to get to 16 soon or at some point, so why not? I mean, Texas and OU and Notre Dame seem to be the only 3 prizes out there, and we can go get 2 of them. And then who knows, in his mind, Mike, I think he could be sitting there looking ahead to 20, 24, if not being the Roger Goodell of a 32-team Saturday league that looks a hell of a lot like the NFL and signs $1 billion TV deal. I mean, these are all things that if you're looking 5, 10, 15 years down the road, I don't think they're off the table. And I think he's trying to stay one step ahead and also keep those 2 teams from going to the Big Ten or ACC.